Good afternoon, learners. Welcome you all to this Darshan session. Now, today I will be discussing on a particular topic, that is phytogeographic regions and endemism. Now, this particular unit, it belongs to plant ecology and taxonomy, this particular course of BSc General in Botany. Now, to start with, there are actually two topics on which we are going to focus today. One is phytogeographic regions, especially we will be talking on phytogeographic regions of India. And then we will be discussing on the distribution of the flora, and based on the distribution, the plants can be categorized into three groups, of which one group is the endemic flora. Basically, we have three different groups, that is wides, endemics, and discontinuous species, of which the second one is very, very important from your examination or from your semester point of view, that is endemism. So, what is meant by phytogeography? Phytogeography is the branch of biogeography which is concerned with the geographic distribution of plant species and their influence on the earth's surface. So, you can see from the very name that it is a combination of plants, that is botany, and to some extent it also has the essence of geography, because you want to study the pattern of distribution of the flora across the globe or across India in our cases. Phytogeography is concerned with all aspects of plant distribution, from the controls on the distribution of species ranges to the factors that govern the composition of the entire communities and floras. So, the distribution of flora and what are the factors that govern the distribution. Sometimes you may find a particular plant which is very widely distributed. You may find a particular plant which is very much restricted in its localization. Or you can find a presence of a particular plant which is sporadic in nature, that is, in some parts of the world it is found, again in another part of the world it is found. Okay, so it's not uniform distribution. So these are the different patterns based on which you can categorize the distribution, and all these are included within this phytogeography, within this branch of study. Now, one of the earliest proponents was Prussian natural scientists who is known as Alexander von Humboldt, and he is regarded as the father of phytogeography. Why? Because he was actually one of the pioneers who was instrumental in studying these phytogeographic patterns all across the globe. Von Humboldt advocated a quantitative approach to phytogeography that has characterized modern plant geography, or that has actually led us to understanding of the distribution pattern of the flora across the world and also in India. Now, phytogeography can be divided into two categories. One is descriptive phytogeography. Descriptive means it deals with the actual description of the floristic or vegetational groups found in different parts of the world. That means you need to identify the flora, you need to describe the flora, that means in which family it belongs to, what are the salient features of that particular flora, and how the geography is actually affecting the morphology or the different salient features of that particular flora. So all these are encompassed within descriptive phytogeography. Next, you have the interpretive or dynamic phytogeography, that is dynamics of migration and evolution of plants and floras. Perhaps you must be knowing that it might happen that a particular plant, it originates in a particular center, and based on that you perhaps know that there are different centers of origin. Now, it's not that the plant will remain confined in the center of origin, because ultimately it might spread. Ultimately the seeds, the propagules, these might spread to a different area, and then there can be another center which is called as the center of diversity. So you can, I think it is very clear that there is some sort of migration of the propagules, migration of the seeds from one part of the globe to another. Okay, so these kind of things, these kind of features or the migration features, these are all included within dynamic phytogeography. Now, based on this, if we now come to India, what is the scenario in India? So based on this, okay, you have phytogeographic regions, 9 phytogeographic regions in India. Now, what are phytogeographic regions? This is the area of uniform climatic conditions that possess distinctly recognizable vegetation. And based on that, India has been categorized into 9 such regions. Now, which are these regions? Western Himalayas, Eastern Himalayas, Indus Plain, Gangetic Plain, Central India, Deccan, Western coasts of Malabar, Assam, and Bay Islands of Andaman and Nicobar. So each of these phytogeographic regions, they have their own characteristic flora, and these regions can be further subdivided into certain sub-regions, which we will come one after the other. So if we start with Western Himalayas, now it belongs to which region? Kumaun to Kashmir. The climate is dry, cold climate, 100 to 200 centimeter annual rainfall, and this can be divided into 3 zones. One is sub-mountain region, that is the Shivalik Hills and adjoining areas, 300 to 1500 meter altitude with 100 centimeter annual rainfall, and it has certain unique kind of vegetation, as you can see, dry evergreen, subtropical pine, and tropical moist deciduous forest. Next we come to the temperate or the mountain zone. So this is 1500 to 3500 meter, wet forests, moist and dry temperate forests. And finally the alpine zone, that is further high in altitude, that is 3500 to 5000 meter, scanty rainfall, cool and dry climate, and mostly you have the alpine forests. Which are the typical flora that you find here, or the plant species? Acacia modesta, Bombax ceiba, Cassia fistula, Tuna ciliata, Picea, etc. Next we come to Eastern Himalayas, that is the mountain ranges from Sikkim to Arunachal Pradesh. More than 4000 species of phanerogams, they exist in this particular region. It can be divided into 3 zones. Tropical zone, that is heavy rainfall for long period, and you have mostly predominant shal forests, mixed deciduous forests, semi-evergreen, evergreen and subtropical forests, savanna grassland with typical plant species like albizia, cymbopogon, etc. Even you have certain forest vegetation which is comprised of quercus, cycas, pinus, salix, populus, and so on. The second zone that you have is the temperate zone, which is 2000 to 3500 meter in altitude. Broad-leaved deciduous and coniferous forests consisting of magnolia, abies, larix, suga. Then you again have the alpine zone, that is further height, that is 3690 to 5540 meter, consisting of Artemisia, Potentilla, Carex, Rhododendron. Rhododendron is a very popular species in the Eastern Himalayas. Next, you have the Indus Plain, that is consisting of Gujarat, Delhi, Rajasthan, Haryana and Punjab. So dry region, it's mostly plain, deserts and irrigated lands. You have different combination of biomes. Dry and hot summers alternating with dry and cold winters. So it's an extreme type of climate. Annual rainfall less than 70 centimeter. Tropical thorn forests and grasslands. 3 types of vegetation, that is tropical dry deciduous, tropical thorny and dry shrubs. Again, Indus Plain can be divided into 5 zones. The Aravallis, riverine lowlands, Kutch, arid sandy zone, xerophytic species are mostly present in the arid sandy zone, and the desert zone. So each of these zones, each of these 5 zones again has its own characteristic species, plant species. As you can see, in the Aravallis you have the Butea, Acacia catechu, Ziziphus. In the riverine lowlands you have Dalbergia sisu, Populus, Eucalyptus. In Kutch, you have Acacia, Tamaric, Stenospora. In the arid zone, that is, you have the xerophytic species like Argimon, Opuntia. In the desert zone, you have Calotropis, Procera, Capparis, Eleusine, and so on. Next, you have the Gangetic Plain. That is now from Delhi to Sundarbans, passing through Bihar, Orissa, and Uttaranchal. So even the Bengal, that is also included in the Gangetic Plain. Dry deciduous, scrub, and moist deciduous vegetation, 50 to 150 centimeter. Tropical moist deciduous forests, dry deciduous forests, thorn forests, and mangrove forests. Perhaps all of you know that the Sundarban, the mangrove forests in Sundarban, this is a very well-known, it's a very important kind of ecosystem which is present in India. Now again, this can be categorized into Upper Gangetic, Lower Gangetic, and the Sundarbans. Upper Gangetic Plain, you have the Acacia, Balanitis, Jatropha. Lower Gangetic Plain, Shorea robusta, Artocarpus. In the Sundarbans, as I said, it's the largest mangrove forests with an area of 15,000 square kilometer, and mostly you have the different halophytic species or the mangrove species like Avicennia, Sonaraceae, Bruguera, Phragmites, Typha. So these are very much popular in the Sundarban area. Next, you have the central Himalayas, Nepal, Kumaun Himalaya in west, Sikkim Himalaya in east, divided into western, central, and eastern Nepal. Like you have the Acer, Quercus, Barbaris, Polygonum, etc. Deccan, that is the southern part of the country, starting from southern Madhya Pradesh to Kanyakumari, excluding Western Ghats. So here you have one of the most popular plant species, that is cotton. You have the black soil, so which supports the growth of cotton. 100 centimeter annual rainfall with dry evergreen, dry deciduous, and swamp forests. You have the trees, shrubs, climbers, grasses, mangroves. Almost everything you have here, like trees like Michaelia champaka, Santalum album, the sandalwood, very popular here. Shrubs, hibiscus, bauhinia. The climbers, hiptage, smilax, vitis. Grasses and palms, you have the bambusa, Dendrocalamus, boracious. And among the mangroves, you have Avicennia, Cereops. Then you move to the western coast of Malabar. So now you come to Gujarat to Kanyakumari along Western Ghats, including Kerala, Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Karnataka. So here you have a humid climate with 400 centimeter annual rainfall. Climate is tropical in the coastal areas and temperate in the hills. Among the vegetation, you have evergreen, wet evergreen, and moist deciduous. And a very important kind of forest is predominant in the Nilgiri hills, that is wet temperate forests, which are commonly called the sholas. And again, you have the mangrove forests in the saline swamps on the coasts. Now here you have different kinds of forests, like temperate evergreen forest you have in the Nilgiri, Palni, Annamalai hills. Trees with red tinged leaves, rhododendron, clematis. Subtropical evergreen forests consists of Embelica officinalis, Muraya. Tropical evergreen forest mostly in the Mysore Plateau, western side of Western Ghats, which include Dillenia, Cinnamomum, etc. Among the tropical semi-evergreen forest, you have along the plateaus of Western Ghats certain species like Rauwolfia serpentina. The tropical deciduous forests which are present in the wet vegetation in Cochin and west coast of Karnataka consists of teak, very popular species, Tectona grandis, Butea monosperma, Dalbergia latifolia. Again, along the Arabian seashore, you have the mangrove forest consisting of Rhizophora, Candelia, Xylocarpus, etc. Then we come to Assam, that is the Brahmaputra Valley, Jayantia Hills, Khashi Hills, Garo Hills, Mishmi Hills, the Santosh River, Naga and Mizo Hills, and all the northeastern states like Mizoram, Meghalaya, Nagaland, Manipur, Tripura, and Assam. They have a very high temperature and heavy rainfall. Tropical evergreen and wet temperate forests in the lower plains, while subtropical pine forests in the hilly tracts up to 1700 meter altitude, they have sufficient rainfall with dense vegetation. Here again, it's a combination of different types of forests. You have the tropical forest, that is along the valley or the low foothills, evergreen forests, deciduous forests, wet temperate forest, pine forest, which is at a considerably high altitude, 1200 to 2000 meter above the hills. The riverine forest, that is along the banks of rivers and streams. Swampy forest, that is in Assam, Panicum, Scirpus, Salvinia, Azolla, these are water ferns, so these are very much common in the swampy forests. And then grasslands. Along the plains of Assam, you again find certain grass species, Phragmites, sorghum, saccharum, and so on. And finally, you go to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which again has a warm and humid climate with high temperature and annual rainfall. It consists of littoral mangrove, evergreen, semi-evergreen, and deciduous forests. And this is very, very rich in biodiversity. So that is all about the 9 phytogeographic regions in India. So when you are to study this, you have to remember the names of each of these regions. And then as I discussed that what is the area, I mean which area do they comprise of, what is the climatic condition, what is the rainfall pattern, okay, and then what kind of forests persist in this particular region, and then under each kind of forest you have to remember certain examples, at least 2 or 3 examples from each category. So in that way your answer will be completed. So certain things need to be remembered when you are discussing this topic. You need to remember certain plant species, you need to remember certain names, okay, so that has to be done. Now the next part is that, as I said, that okay fine, this is the phytogeographic region. Now based on the distribution pattern, as I said, the plant species can be categorized into 3 groups. As you can see, that is wides, endemics, and discontinuous species. What is wide? As I said, from the very term it is very clear that these kind of plant species are very much widely distributed. And we often say that they are cosmopolitan in distribution, but actually in case of plant system, the plants, they do not in the true sense they exhibit this cosmopolitan character. But even then, based on the fact that these plants are widely distributed, we call them wides, like Chenopodium, then Taraxacum officinale, Chenopodium album. So these are some of the examples of wides. Now the next category will be the endemism, and we will discuss this particular topic in a little bit elaborate fashion, because this is a very important topic. What is meant by endemism? Endemism means the phenomenon of confinement of a species, genera, if it can be even family or a group, to a very small area. That means you will find certain plant species which are very much restricted in their distribution. They are not widely distributed. They are confined within certain regions. And this concept is known as endemism, or this phenomenon is known as endemism, and such species are known as the endemic species. Now this concept was given by A.P. de Candolle. Now obviously there should be certain reasons that why such plant species are endemic, why they are having a very restricted or confined distribution. So we will study those factors, and we will study the different theories connected to endemism. Now you can see that certain regions of the world, they have this high percentage of endemic species. The fynbos in Cape region, Hawaiian tropical dry and rainforest in United States, Madagascar dry deciduous and lowland forests, New Caledonia dry and rainforest, Palawan rainforests in Philippines. So these are some of the regions which have a very high percentage of endemic species. Now these are some of the common endemic species which are available in India. Caryota urens, Ficus religiosa or bengalensis, that is the pipul tree, which we commonly call as pipul tree. Piper niger or Piper longum, Elateria cardamomum, Eleusine coracana, Crotalaria juncea, Butea monosperma, eagle murmelos, rhododendron, Sesamum indicum. So these are some of the very common endemic species, and many of them have much economic importance as well. Now, what are the characteristics of endemics? Localized distribution because of narrow ecological amplitude, lack of potentiality to migrate due to saturated genomes, the dispersal propagules unable to sustain during migration due to physical barriers. Real endemics never migrate while neo-endemics do migrate. Now, in this context, we will classify the endemics. The endemic species can be categorized into different groups. Now, first is neo-endemics. What are neo-endemics? New means new, modern. So, modern species or endemic forms of recent origin. Why they are recent origin? Why they are endemic? Because they are newly evolved, they did not have sufficient time, they did not get the sufficient time to extend their distribution through migration. So maybe after many years, it may be possible that the new endemics may not remain as endemic species, because if they are given sufficient time to migrate, they might migrate. But till date, they are considered to be endemic and they are newly evolved, like Senecio comrensis. This is an example. Now, it can be differentiated into three types: schizoendemics, derived from taxon of same chromosome number; patroendemics, restricted diploids giving rise to polyploids; and apoendemics, just the reverse, restricted polyploids giving rise to diploids. In addition, there are certain other special terms given, like local endemics, which are found in small land features. Local, that means again restricted. Progressive endemics, that means with time they can spread. Retrogressive endemics, in which case the area of distribution is contracting. And the microendemics, that is the endemics of the lower groups. So all these classifications, they are under the neo-endemics. Next is paleoendemics. It is just the reverse of new endemics. Paleo means which are ancient origin. That means which have primitive origin. Endemic forms of ancient origin restricted to a region due to physical barriers. That means these species, they have originated long back, but they could not migrate. They are restricted. Why? Because there are physical barriers, desert, mountain, oceans, etc. Climatic change, okay, erratic climate, and presence of a particular physiogeography or soil, that is edaphic factors. Maybe they could find that particular soil conducive where they are restricted. If they migrated, they must have tried migration, but they could not succeed in other kinds of climatic condition or other kinds of soil. So they are localized. But they are not newly evolved. They are primitive, or they are of primitive origin or ancient origin. Now, one very reliable example will be in case of epibiotics. When I come to epibiotics or relic endemics, which is actually the third category of endemics, you must have heard about ginkgo biloba. Now, ginkgo biloba is actually a gymnosperm, and it is also popularly called as the maidenhair tree. Now, this ginkgo biloba is considered to be a relic endemic. Relic endemic means ginkgo biloba actually is a plant which persisted from the Mesozoic to the Cenozoic times. That means if you consider the geological time scale, okay, it belonged to a particular epoch or an era which is quite ancient. It is not recent. So ginkgo biloba actually existed during that time, and all the contemporary flora which existed along with ginkgo biloba, they are no more on this earth, but ginkgo biloba is still there. So it is actually considered as a living fossil, and it exists even today in certain parts of China and Japan. So there you can find ginkgo biloba, but all over the world you will find almost very, very less percentage of this particular plant species. Of course, in many areas they are now cultivated. That means plantations are there. But naturally growing ginkgo biloba is very, very restricted across the world. So this is known as the relic endemic or epibiotic. That means they are the survivors of the fossil group. They could survive only in restricted pockets due to exceptionally favorable environment and lack of competition from other organisms. Why ginkgo biloba exists only in certain parts of China and Japan, not in all over the world? Because it finds that particular climate or that particular region to be favorable for its growth. And that is why it exists in abundance. Okay, so in short, relic endemics or epibiotics means plants which are not of recent origin but retaining a narrow distribution. So they are similar to paleoendemics, but you have to remember that relic endemics or epibiotics mostly includes the living fossils. Okay, that is, their contemporary members are no more on this earth. Pseudoendemic. Pseudo means false. That means these arise due to appearance of mutations in the local population, but they ultimately tend to disappear. So I think pseudoendemics, they are not actually, in the true sense, they are not endemics. Okay, they originate due to certain drastic genetic alteration, which you call as the mutations. So now we come to the theories of endemism. Now I will spend a little bit of time here because you have to very carefully understand the different theories which explains the phenomenon of endemism. Now first one is the epibiotic theory. Now we are already introduced to the term epibiotics. What is epibiotic? That is, like I gave the example of ginkgo biloba. That means the plant species which are of ancient origin but they could not migrate, they are confined or they are localized. Why? Because they could not find favorable climate, favorable soil or favorable environmental condition in other parts of the world, and that is why they are confined. Okay, so that is actually explained in the epibiotic theory which was given by Ridley in 1922. That means they are the survivals of the larger groups of the past and they are considered to be the relic type, and they did not develop sufficient methods of dispersal. They have a very weak dispersal mechanism, and that is why they could not migrate, they could not spread across the world. And they are very peaceful species, they are confined within a particular region, they are not at all aggressive, they don't want to spread themselves, they are happy with, they have very little requirements and they are happy with it. So that is actually explained in the epibiotic theory of endemism. So they remain confined as the relics of the past within a limited and isolated area, like Sequoia gigantea, which is found in Sierra Nevada, and ginkgo biloba, as I already told that it is endemic in China and Japan. So it could not migrate, it could not spread. The second theory, which was given by Willis in 1922 again, is called as the age and area hypothesis. What is this theory? What does this theory speak about? It says that there is a relationship between the age of a species and the area of a species. That means if the age is small, and then this relation is what kind of relation? This is directly proportional. That means age and area. Age directly proportional to the area. What does it mean? If the age is new, the area will be low. If the age is less, area will be less. If the age is more, area will be more. That means a species which is newly evolved, it occupies a lesser area, and a species which is which has a very ancient origin, or which dates back to ancient time, it has a very large area. It will encompass a very large area. So you see, this particular hypothesis, it contradicts the epibiotic theory. So area of distribution of a species is proportional to the period of time for which it has existed. There is a direct relationship between area of distribution and age of a species. So if you have a small area, then you have to understand that it is recent in origin, and if it has a very large area, then you have to understand that it is ancient in origin. So endemic species and genera are new and recent forms of gradually extending plant groups, and they represent, now this theory states, age and area hypothesis states that all endemic species are newly evolved. Why? Because the endemic species they occupy, they are confined, they occupy a very small area, so they are newly evolved. So this is according to the age and area hypothesis. And obviously those species which you see to be widely distributed, then according to this hypothesis, they have originated at a very ancient time or primitive times. But this is not true. There are several contradictions with this hypothesis. Although there are supporters of this theory who cite certain examples of plants like Primula, Impatiens, Gentiana, Coleus elongatus and Coleus barbatus. These are distributed on the dry Retigala mountains in Sri Lanka. The former species is endemic, while the latter is widely distributed in tropical Asia and Africa. So the two species, they have different kind of nature, or they have different characteristic feature in terms of their distribution. Now there are scientists who actually criticize this theory, and there are several grounds for that. Number one, area of distribution of a species depends upon a number of factors, including the dispersal capacity and geographic barriers surrounding the area of occurrence. This is number one. Number two, some dwindling species or fossil forms have persisted in living condition in certain pockets due to continuation of favorable condition and lack of competition. Example, ginkgo biloba. So if you take ginkgo biloba is as I said, it is an endemic species. But ginkgo biloba is not a newly evolved species because it existed in the early geological time periods. So that contradicts the age and area hypothesis if you take ginkgo biloba as your example. Some recently evolved economic plants are occupying vast stretches of land in the world because of interference by man acting as dispersal agent. This point is also very important because it has been seen that certain species are newly evolved, but they are very much widely distributed across the globe. Then if you support age and area hypothesis, you cannot explain that. Because see, when you are explaining or discussing the migration or the distribution of a plant species, you have to understand that the climate or the soil, this is not the sole factor. Because in addition to that, there are anthropogenic activities. Man themselves, they are acting as a dispersal agent. So the human intervention is there. So that should be taken into consideration when you are discussing the anything on migration or distribution of a species. So I hope you get a clear-cut difference between the epibiotic theory and age and area hypothesis. One simply contradicts the other, and of course there are examples which support age and area hypothesis. Again, there are examples which support epibiotic theory. The third theory is known as the theory of tolerance. That is, Good in 1931 proposed this particular theory. What does it suggest? Plants are able to spread to only those parts of the world which have environmental conditions within the range of tolerance of the species. So, all kinds of climatic conditions cannot be tolerated by all plant species. I mean, whenever a species tends to disperse, the seeds tend to disperse, it would be conducive with the existing climatic conditions. For instance, the soil, water, minerals, sunlight. So these are all the basic raw materials for a plant growth. And whenever all these conditions are suitable, then only a plant will, then only the seed, it will actually germinate. So the plant tries to spread, but even then it cannot. Why? Because of this factor, that is the range of tolerance of the species. The total area which a species can occupy due to its range of tolerance is called potential area. This area is not static. It may shrink or expand due to change in the gene pool, evolution and environment. Because if you remember, when I discussed succession in one of my sessions earlier, I told that climate is not a factor which is constant. Okay, so climate keeps on changing. The environment is not a static parameter, or it's a variable. Because what the conditions that exist at present may not exist after several years. So based on that, this potential area cannot be static. It can change. That means total area which a species can occupy, it will change. It will change depending on the environment, the gene pool. So the species may not be able to spread in all these areas. So it might be possible that it might expand, the area might expand, or the area might even shrink depending on the change in the climatic conditions or the environment. So that is one of the important factors that also dictates the endemism, because today you are finding a plant which is widely distributed, but someday it might happen that this same plant species might change into an endemic species because it could not find the surrounding situations to be favorable for its growth. So that is actually explained in the theory of tolerance. So this is mostly based on the tolerance of the species, or sometimes it is also termed as the ecological amplitude. That is how much it can tolerate the variations in the different factors. So these are the three theories that exist till now with regard to the explanation of the phenomenon of the endemism. Now what are the factors? Very simple. That is, one will be the geographical factor. Why they are endemic? Why they are confined? Because they cannot migrate. Why they cannot migrate? Because there are some barriers. There are some geographical barriers. Like in the north you have the Himalayas. In south you have so many oceans, the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea. We also have the Bay of Bengal. So oceans, seas, in deserts. So that is the beauty of India, that you have almost everything in India. And that is why in India you also have a very rich endemic species, because there are species which cannot cross these barriers. Like you find 82% endemic species in Hawaii Islands, 72% in New Zealand, and 50% in Fiji Islands. So you have the lofty mountain chains, you have the deserts, you have the oceans, vast oceans or seas. In India, the Himalayan range and the South India, they have a very high percentage of endemic species. But Indo-Gangetic plain, very poor in endemic species, because in Indo-Gangetic plain there is no such barriers. It's a plain land. So there are no geographical barriers, adequate geographical barriers. So they have less endemic species. So all such endemic species are enabled to migrate freely either to the north or to the south. Why they are not able to migrate to the north? Because you have the lofty mountains in the north. Why they are not able to migrate to the south? Because, as I said, they have you have vast oceans in the southern parts of India. So that's the reason that you find a huge abundance of endemic species. Among the biological factor, you have the natural crossing and mutation among closely related species growing in a favorable locality. This has given rise to freely formed new species in the temperate and alpine vegetation of the Himalayas. So you have the crossing, you have the mutation, which again gives rise to a new species. And once a new species is formed, obviously it will have a restricted distribution, because it will again take time to migrate, because it's a newly evolved species. And therefore that is one of the reasons for the endemism or the localized distribution. Now the next part is the calculation of the global pattern of endemic richness. Now again, how do you calculate the percentage of the endemic species? So here a little bit of formula or little bit of mathematics will come into the scenario. Now one is the taxon based method. This is calculated as a sum of range size extrapolated to the total flora and corrected for area using a standard area of 10,000 km square. The range size is measured as the number of grid cells or ecoregions in which a species occurs. So in this taxon based method, in certain parts, like as you can see Africa, Bolivia and Australia, you have large data sets with a large number of vascular plants. Whereas in Indo-Malaya, you have an ecoregion based data. So the data sets will vary according to the taxon-based method, the data sets will vary for different parts of the world. The second method that you have is the inventory-based method. Now, this method is based on the number of species of endemics and on the chronology, that is the affiliation of a species to a broader biogeographic group. The flora of each region is first divided into chronological groups. The amount of range equivalents attributed to the region is calculated as the fraction of the region of each chronological group multiplied by the number of species of the chronological group. So you have to calculate two parameters. One, the fraction of the region of each chronological group, and second, the number of species of a particular chronological group, and you multiply the two and you get the amount of range equivalents. Now the values for all chronological groups are summed up to yield the total number of range equivalents for the region. This total figure is divided by the area size of the region in kilometers square and multiplied by 10,000 to yield the number of range equivalents per 10,000 kilometer square. Because here also you have seen what is the standard area in taxon-based method. Also you see that the standard area that you have taken is 10,000 kilometers square. So you are applying the same here also. The island flora and fauna maintain high degree of endemism due to geographical isolation and limited interchange with neighboring mainland. So you have to also understand. See, I gave you an example of Hawaiian Island. Now why island have very high endemic species? It is very clear. As I said, it is bounded by oceans or seas. Okay, so the plants, they get very little chance to spread. Okay, so they remain confined. And they are very peaceful plants. Okay, they don't want to fight. Okay, even like humans, the plants also, there are certain plants which are very much aggressive. They fight amongst themselves. Okay, in order to procure more land, okay, more resource, just like human nature. There are plants which also they love these kind of things. Again, there are plants which are very peaceful. No, I am happy with what I have. Okay, so the island community plants, okay, these are very peaceful plants. They are happy with little things. They are happy with small things. So even the endemic species are also in that way. They are very much satisfied with what they have. Okay, they are peaceful in nature. Okay. Next we come to the third category of species, that is discontinuous or disjunct species. Now this is totally different from the other two, that is whites and endemics. Discontinuous means you find them in some parts of the world, again you don't find them somewhere, again you find in other part. So it's a very sporadic kind of thing. It's a very random kind of distribution. Now why this is so? The plants occurring at two or more distant places of the world, separated by hundreds or thousands of kilometers apart. You find maybe in America, again you are finding in the extreme east. In between you don't find this plant. So I'm giving you just a hypothetical example. Now you must be wondering why. So there are factors that explains this phenomenon of discontinuity. Now what are those phytogeographic causes? The species might have evolved at more than one place and failed to migrate outside their original habitat because of barrier. One factor can be barrier again, like the endemism. Species which were once widely distributed in the past disappeared from certain areas and are now surviving in some distant pockets. This is one of the very, very important factors. I will come to this factor shortly. Plants having specific climatic requirements are found in widely separated areas with similar environmental condition. Example, plants of Arctic region are also found in alpine zone of high mountains in tropics and subtropics. Now, for explaining the discontinuous distribution, you have two theories, theory of land bridge and theory of continental drift. We will quickly see these two theories. Theory of land bridge. Now, land bridge occur in between separated continents, helping in the migration of various taxa from one continent to the other. Uniform distribution of plants and animals in different parts of the world during Paleozoic era was due to those land bridge. With the passage of time, the land bridges became submerged and the connection between various continents snapped beyond the dispersal capacity of the organism. So what does it mean? Like initially what happened is the land masses were continuous. There were no separation. So the plants lived happily. They were evenly spread. But as time passed on, like in the Paleozoic era, it was the situation. But if you have read about the geological time scale and the different events occurring during the geological time scale, you must have studied or you must be knowing that it happened during the prehistoric times that some land masses got snapped beneath the sea. Some land masses they became discontinuous. They got separated. So what will happen? The species which were evenly distributed, they get disturbed. They get scattered now because the landmass is no longer continuous. They are no more joined by those land bridges. And therefore, this is one of the factors that explains the discontinuous species or discontinuity. So that is theory of land bridge. Theory of continental drift, propounded by Wegener. Now, the whole landmass was a single supercontinent during Paleozoic era, and we call it Pangaea. And this was surrounded by sea on all the sides, which was named as Panthalassa. So, Pangaea and Panthalassa initially. But then, as we moved on during the Mesozoic, Pangaea, what happened? So, Pangaea was a continuous landmass. But what happened during the Mesozoic? The Pangaea was split up into two large land masses, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana land in the south. So what happened? Pangaea got splitted up. And what will happen to the plant species which are present in the Pangaea? They will get separated now. So they will get discontinuous because the landmass has been split into two parts, Laurasia and Gondwana land. So the two large landmasses having characteristic flora and fauna now broke up into new landmasses called continents. So what happened? Even later on, Laurasia and Gondwana land also they got split up. And all the continents present in the present day map that we find, they actually originated in this fashion. And therefore, it is not surprising that the plant species will be scattered or they will undergo a very discontinuous distribution. So this is actually explained in the theory of continental drift. So Laurasia gave rise to Eurasia, Greenland and North America. Gondwana land gave rise to South America, Africa, India, Polynesia, Australia and Antarctica. About 135 million years ago, reorientation of continents began. The continents were drifted apart by oceans. This is called continental drift. So ultimately, this actually what is meant by continental drift, I hope you get the point. And therefore, this is also termed as the theory of the continental drift, which also explains the distribution of a species, why they are discontinuous or why they are disjunct, called as the disjunct species. So I think these are some of the points which we should remember or which we should focus upon when we are studying endemism, because wides and discontinuous species, these are also connected with endemism, and that is why while explaining endemism I also intentionally brought these two terminologies in front of you so that you can very clearly demarcate between the three categories of the distribution of plant species. Now, we are slowly coming towards the end, and before ending, I will just take upon another topic which is also very much connected with endemism, and that is the biodiversity. Biodiversity hotspots. What is meant by biodiversity? Now, you know that the tropical regions, they have a very high biodiversity. Okay, because of various factors, like they have a very high, they get a very high solar radiation. Okay, any particular species, they cannot gain predominance because of the predator attack, and because of the surrounding environmental conditions, because it is a very hot and humid type of climate in the tropical region. Okay, so they are very much chances of getting contaminated or infection, pathogen infection. This is also very high. Okay, and the predator action, that is also to some extent, that is also very high. So any species cannot gain a very kind of a dominance pattern, and that is why there are so many species which are flourishing together, and that is why it's a very rich biodiversity. Now based on that, the biogeographic regions with high diversity, that is actually called as the biodiversity hotspots, you will find that 2.3% of the land surface of the earth, they contain half of the world's endemics. And you will find that the endemic species are very, very rich in these biodiversity hotspots. Now, what are the factors that determine hotspot areas? Number of total species, number of unique species, and number of species at risk. Now, if you try to find out the biodiversity hotspot areas in India, so number one, again, you have the Eastern Himalaya, which is the cradle of speciation. You have so many endemic species also. Nepenthes khasiana, the pitcher plant, Taxus wallichiana, from which you get the very important anti-cancerous agent, that is the anti-cancerous drug, that is Taxol. Taxus wallichiana, which is a threatened species because we have extracted Taxus so much for the anti-cancer drugs. That is why it's a threatened species. Center of origin of palm species, 2000 endemic species out of 5800 plant species in the Indian region. Paphiopedilum spicerianum, it is also known as the lady's slipper orchid. It is endemic to the northeastern region of India. So you can see how rich the Eastern Himalaya is in terms of endemic species. And again, Eastern Himalaya, as I said, is a biodiversity hotspot, one of the biodiversity hotspots. Second, if we go to Western Ghats, 308 tree species out of 490 are endemic. 1500 dicot endemics. Agastya Malai Hills harbored the highest plant diversity and endemic species. 112 orchid species out of 245 are endemic. 3000 out of 6000 species of vascular plants are endemic. So these are again, as I said, biodiversity hotspot, as well as they are having a very high abundance of endemic species. Indo-Burma. So here also you have half out of 13,500 plant species to be endemic. And then Sundaland, which is the area that we consider to be Sundaland? Southeast Asia, including Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. Here you have mangroves, coral reefs, seagrass beds. So all these, you have several, among these 4 biodiversity hotspots, if you calculate, you will see that you have a very high endemic species. Lastly, when we really talk about biodiversity, then we should also discuss what are the causes that or what are the factors that actually can be considered to be the threats to biodiversity. Habitat destruction, resource management, increased tourism, illegal immigration, poaching, climate change, forest fragmentation, introduction of exotic species. Many species from outside India, they have migrated and they have settled. Okay, they have established. In ecology we call it ECESIS, ECESIS. So they have actually established, and these are very aggressive species. Lantana camera, Parthenium hysterophorus, Eichhornia crassipes, that is water hyacinth. These are all exotic species, and they are actually threats to biodiversity. They are causing our natural flora to get eliminated. Natural catastrophic agents, flood, drought, cyclone, volcano, fire. And lastly, the jhum cultivation, which is usually practiced in the northeastern states of India. So all these factors have cumulatively led to the loss of the biodiversity, or they can be considered as a threat to biodiversity, and we should be very careful. We should that is why actually different conservation acts, they have actually come up, because if we actually lose our biodiversity, it is very simple, we are losing a large number of endemic species also. Okay, that is species which are confined to a particular region. We are actually, that will lead to the loss, and we will really lose our natural resource, because the vegetation, it is considered as our natural resource. Okay, so with that actually we will come towards the end of today's session. So please go through the unit. Okay, all of these units you will find in that particular course, that is plant ecology and taxonomy, as I said. Go through them, and in case of any difficulty or query, please feel free to send us queries through email, or you can also call us at any time. Thank you all, and have a very, very good learning.
Hello and welcome learners to today's session on